There comes a moment in every person's life when the mind becomes louder than reality itself, not because the world is overwhelming, but because we give too much power to the shadows of our own thoughts. We begin to carry people in our heads long after they have walked out of our lives. We replay their words, reinterpret their actions, assign meanings that were never there, and build entire stories around individuals who may not even be thinking of us. And without realizing it, we surrender our inner peace to an image that exists only within our imagination. Thinking about people is natural, but overthinking them is a slow erosion of the self. When you think too much about anyone, you place them at the center of your inner world, and in doing so you slowly step out of your own. You start shaping your choices around assumptions. You adjust your behavior based on fears. You quiet your own voice because you think someone else's voice carries more truth than your own. This is how people lose themselves, not through external chaos, but through internal devotion to thoughts that were never meant to rule them. Every person you meet carries their own complexity, their own wounds, their own dreams, and often their own confusion. When you overthink them, you try to decode a puzzle that even they themselves have not yet solved. You project meanings from your own insecurities. You give importance to gestures that were accidental. You interpret silence as rejection and kindness as attachment. And soon, your mind becomes a battlefield where your fears and fantasies fight for dominance. None of this reflects who the other person truly is. It only reflects the unhealed parts of you that are desperate for clarity. The danger of thinking too much about anyone is that it turns them into a symbol. They stop being a person with flaws and become an idea that either saves you or destroys you. But people are not symbols. They are not here to fulfill our expectations, answer our questions, or validate our sense of worth. When you place someone on a pedestal or in a prison inside your mind, you distort their humanity and abandon your own. The more energy you invest in imagining someone's feelings, intentions, or opinions, the further you drift from the truth of your own inner life. When you constantly think about someone, you must ask yourself, what part of me is seeking something from them? Is it validation? Is it acceptance? Is it unresolved fear? Is it the loneliness that whispers in the background? Most of the time, obsessive thinking is not about the person at all. It is about what you believe they represent: safety, attention, security, or the hope of being seen. But none of these things come from another person's mind. They arise from understanding your own. Freedom begins the moment you reclaim your attention. The moment you say, I will not build my inner world around someone who does not live here. You must return to yourself. Return to your desires, your path, your growth. When your mind wanders towards someone endlessly, gently guide it back, not with anger, but with awareness. Understand that every thought directed outward is energy taken away from your own unfolding. The truth is simple. When you stop overthinking people, you start seeing them clearly. You also start seeing yourself clearly. You stop expecting them to complete your story and realize they are only characters in certain chapters. Some will stay, some will leave, some will remain mysteries. And that is the nature of human connection. It is never fully graspable, never fully predictable. But it does not need to be. What matters is not how others think of you or how deeply you analyze them, but how consciously you live within your own being. Do not let your mind be occupied by people who have not earned that space. Do not let your peace be shaped by the imagined thoughts of others. Your inner life is sacred, and your thoughts are the architects of your destiny. Choose carefully who you allow to live there. When you stop thinking too much about anyone, you return to your own center. You reclaim your strength. You rediscover your clarity. And most importantly, you realize that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you build with yourself. When you move through life, you meet countless people who leave different impressions on your heart and mind, yet the real struggle begins when someone occupies more space inside you than the reality of their presence ever justified. There is a quiet, unseen process that happens in the mind. A small thought becomes a repeated thought. The repeated thought becomes an inner dialogue. And soon that inner dialogue becomes a whole constructed world centered around someone else. When you give anyone more space in your mind than they deserve, you start building emotional architecture around their existence, even if they never offered you enough foundation to justify it. It happens subtly, often without your awareness, as though your subconscious is trying to fill an empty room with a person simply because you left the door open. You replay their words, their expressions, their perceived intentions, and you begin to inject meaning into the smaller interactions, assigning value to things that were perhaps casual, accidental, or even meaningless to them. In that process, You stop living for your own experience and begin to interpret life through the lens of someone else's imaginary role in your inner world. This mental occupation becomes even more dangerous when it begins to distort your sense of self. You start losing your center as you fixate on how someone might perceive you, what they might be thinking, or how they might react. You allow your emotional weather to be determined by the unpredictable climate of someone else's imagined thoughts. And the more you do that, the further you drift from your own clarity. You forget your priorities, your boundaries, your needs, and your inner truth, because you are too busy imagining the movement of someone else's inner landscape. You might even begin to trust your assumptions more than you trust the facts of your own life. This is how the mind traps itself in cycles of rumination, overanalyzing messages, dissecting moments, replaying possibilities, and imagining scenarios that were never grounded in reality to begin with. Instead of observing people as they are, you start seeing them as symbols of your fears, your hopes, or your unresolved wounds. They become mirrors that reflect your own insecurities back to you, yet you mistakenly believe you are seeing them and not yourself. Their silence becomes a projection screen for your worries. Their presence becomes an anchor for your longing. Their absence becomes an invitation for your imagination to create stories that only deepen your attachment. You forget that people are human, flawed, and often unaware of the impact their presence has on you. You forget that not everyone who appears significant in your mind is meant to be significant in your life. You forget that some people are only meant to pass through, not stay, and certainly not live inside the private space of your thoughts. The mind tends to cling because it seeks meaning, security, and connection, yet these are things that cannot be forcefully created through obsessive thinking. When someone takes up too much of your mental space, it is usually a sign that something inside you feels incomplete, unsure, or neglected. The mind gravitates toward whatever seems to offer clarity or closure, even if that clarity is imagined and that closure is impossible. In truth, the more you think about someone, the more you create a version of them that may not match reality at all. You start believing in a mental image rather than the actual person. You romanticize, idealize, or demonize depending on what your emotions project onto them. Sometimes the person you think about didn't treat you exceptionally well, didn't invest in you, didn't understand you, or didn't reciprocate your energy, yet you give them more importance than someone who's proven their loyalty or presence. Sometimes you think about someone not because of who they truly are, but because of what you hoped they could be. The mind often holds on to potential, not truth. It holds on to the role you imagined they would play in your life rather than the reality of their behavior. This is how emotional attachment forms around illusions instead of genuine connection. This is how your inner world becomes crowded with people who never earned a place in it. Giving someone too much space in your mind also creates an inner imbalance. Your emotional energy starts flowing outward instead of inward. You give away your peace, your time, your focus, and your emotional strength to someone who may not even be aware of the weight you carry. You start living reactively instead of intentionally basing your decision on imagined possibilities rather than grounded realities. You might even hesitate to take actions in your life because you are over-considering how someone else might interpret them. This is a silent form of self-abandonment. It is a way of placing someone else at the center of your psychological universe, while pushing yourself to the margins. The truth is that no one deserves that much control over your inner world unless they have earned it through consistent actions, respect, presence, and mutual care. And even then, healthy attachment never requires obsessive thought or emotional dependency. Healthy relationships grow from clarity, not confusion. They grow from grounded connection, not constant rumination. They grow from presence, not projection. Giving someone space in your mind should be a conscious choice, not an unintentional surrender. You must learn to reclaim your mental territory. You must learn to observe your thoughts without letting them spiral. You must learn to recognize when your mind is creating story rather than perceiving truth. The more you strengthen your inner boundaries, the easier it becomes to prevent others from occupying emotional space they did not earn. Your mind is your sanctuary, and it should remain a place where your own growth, healing, and purpose are cultivated. When someone enters that space, it should be because they add meaning, not because your anxiety invited them. When someone remains in that space, it should be because they enrich your life, not because your unresolved emotions anchor them there. You deserve to live with a mind that belongs to you, not one that constantly orbits around someone else's perceived significance. You deserve to focus on your own journey, your potential, your peace. You deserve to be the main character in your own inner world, Overthinking people is one of the quietest ways the mind distances itself from truth. When you begin to analyze someone repeatedly, trying to decipher their intentions, decode their expressions, or interpret their silence, you unknowingly step into a world shaped not by reality but by your own projections. Overthinking does not bring understanding. It brings distortion. It creates layers of imagined meaning over simple moments, turning ordinary interactions into complex emotional puzzles. You begin to treat every glance as a message, every pause as a judgment, every absence as a declaration. These interpretations feel vivid and convincing, yet they are built on nothing more than assumptions nourished by your inner fears and hopes. Instead of seeing people clearly, you see them through a fog created by your own emotional history. The mind tends to fill in the unknown with stories, especially when you feel uncertain or vulnerable. When you don't know what someone thinks of you, or when their behavior seems ambiguous, the mind rushes to create explanations that feel logical yet are often woven from insecurity rather than truth. This is why overthinking someone rarely leads to genuine insight. It magnifies your doubts, amplifies your fears, and colors your perception with emotions that have nothing to do with the other person. The danger here is subtle but powerful. You begin responding to your own assumptions as though they were real. You may withdraw because you assume they don't care, or overextend yourself because you assume they do. You may hold on to someone because you imagine their inner world is tied to yours, or let go of someone because you misinterpret their silence. In all of this, you are not interacting with them. You are interacting with a version of them shaped inside your mind. When you overthink someone, you do not gain clarity, you lose it. You replace observation with obsession. You replace presence with analysis. You replace genuine connection with imagined emotional landscapes. The deeper you fall into this mental cycle, the more disconnected you become from the factual reality of who they are and how they actually behave. You might convince yourself that you understand them deeply, yet what you truly understand is your own emotional patterns projected onto their image. This kind of thinking traps you in illusions. You create a narrative around them, and then you fit every interaction into the narrative, even when the reality contradicts it. Instead of seeing what is, you cling to what your mind has constructed. Overthinking people also drains your emotional energy. You invest time and attention into thinking about conversations that never happened, meanings that were never expressed, and intentions that never existed. This mental drain leaves you exhausted, not because of anything the person did, but because of the mental world you built around them. The more you overthink, the more emotionally entangled you feel. Even if no real relationship exists, this emotional entanglement becomes a form of self-inflicted suffering. You carry weight that does not belong to you, and you feel emotions that were not triggered by actual events but by imagined interpretation. You become trapped in a loop where every thought fuels another, and the mind refuses to rest. Overthinking someone also creates emotional misalignment. You begin expecting things from someone who never promised anything. You hope for understanding from someone who may not know what you feel. You anticipate disappointment from someone who may not even be thinking about you. Your emotional world becomes tied to possibilities rather than facts. And in this misalignment, you set yourself up for confusion. You might feel rejected not because you were rejected, but because your expectations were based on a reality you invented. This is why overthinking people creates illusions. It disconnects you from authentic connection and ties you to imagined outcomes. The mind often overthinks people because it seeks certainty. It wants to know where it stands, what someone feels, and what might happen next. Yet people are not puzzles to be solved. They are fluid, complex beings who change with time, mood, experience, and circumstance. Trying to understand them through overanalysis is like trying to read the wind by staring at a single leaf. True understanding comes from observation, communication, and presence, not from constructing endless theories in your mind. The more you attempt to understand people by overthinking them, the further you drift from genuine insight. Another danger of overthinking is that it creates emotional dependency. The more you focus on someone, the more your inner state begins to revolve around their perceived actions or inaction. You start feeling anxious when they are distant, relieved when they are near, confused when they are inconsistent, and hopeful when they show kindness. Yet, all these emotions arise from the stories you tell yourself about them, rather than the truth of their behavior. This inner dependency makes you believe that understanding them is the key to finding peace, which then pushes you deeper into overthinking. But peace never comes from decoding someone else. It comes from untangling your own mind. When you stop overthinking people, You begin to see them as they are, not as your fear. Imagine them, not as your hopes paint them, not as your insecurities project onto them. You see their humanity, their flaws, their limitations, and their truth. You no longer idealize them or demonize them. You simply understand them within the boundaries of reality. This clarity liberates your mind. It returns your energy to yourself. It allows you to engage with people based on who they truly are, not on the stories you create in your head. Your mind becomes lighter when you stop trying to interpret the unspoken. Your emotions become steadier when you stop building meaning around uncertainties. Your relationships become healthier when you stop assuming and start observing. Overthinking does not deepen understanding. It deepens confusion. Real understanding comes from presence, not from mental overactivity. When you choose to see someone clearly instead of endlessly analyzing them, you reclaim your inner peace. You reclaim your clarity. You reclaim your power. Your peace grows when you return your attention to yourself, because the mind is never meant to orbit endlessly around the thoughts, actions, or presence of other people. When your attention is scattered across the imagined intentions of others, your inner world becomes unsteady, easily shaken by the slightest changes in someone else's behavior. But when you bring that attention back to your own inner life, something subtle and powerful happens. The noise quiets, the confusion loosens, and the emotional weight you've been carrying begins to dissolve. Most people do not realize how much of their unrest comes from thinking about someone else more than they think about themselves. They worry about what someone meant, what someone feels, what someone might do, and while the mind is busy analyzing others, it forgets to take care of itself. Returning your attention to yourself is not selfishness. It is self-responsibility, a reclaiming of the inner ground you abandoned while trying to understand or anticipate someone else. When your attention is focused inward, you begin to notice things you could not see before. You notice where your thoughts come from, which emotions rise without reason, which fears whisper in the background, which memories shape your reactions, and which desires guide your actions. This awareness is the foundation of peace. Peace is not created by controlling the behavior of others or predicting how they will treat you. It is created by navigating the landscape of your own mind with clarity instead of confusion. When you turn inward, you stop trying to change the external world to calm your internal world. You stop seeking stability in people who are inconsistent. You stop waiting for someone else to validate your worth. You stop expecting others to provide what you are afraid to give yourself. Returning to yourself is a homecoming, a reminder that the center of your life must always be within you, not in someone else's hands. The reason your peace grows in this inward return is that your attention is your most powerful form of energy. Wherever you place it, that place grows. If you place it on someone who does not value you, your insecurity grows. If you place it on someone whose actions confuse you, your doubt grows. If you place it on someone who is emotionally distant, your longing grows. But when you place it on yourself, your clarity grows, your confidence grows, your understanding grows, your self-respect grows. Your inner world begins to strengthen because it is finally being fed by your own awareness rather than drained by your overthinking of others. Peace is not something you seek. It is something you create by choosing where your attention lies. There is a silent truth about human relationships that many people overlook. No matter how close someone is to you, they cannot live your life for you. They cannot feel your emotions for you, solve your inner conflicts for you, heal your wounds for you, or steady your mind for you. Only you can do that. But when you overthink someone, you unconsciously hand over the responsibility of your emotional state to them. You let their actions decide your mood. You let their silence become a personal wound. You let their unpredictability shape your sense of security. This happens because your attention has left its rightful place within you and gone wandering into the imagined world of someone else's feelings and choices. When you return that attention to yourself, you reclaim the ability to shape your emotions, interpret your reality, and protect your peace. Returning attention to yourself also means recognizing the boundaries between your world and someone else's. You cannot control the thoughts, decisions, or emotional journeys of others. You cannot force understanding, force affection, or force clarity from anyone. And when you try to, you suffer. By turning inward, you free yourself from the impossible task of managing what is not yours. You detach from the illusion that your peace depends on someone else's behavior. You begin to understand that the only place where true stability can be built is inside your own perception and choices. This is where peace grows quietly, steadily, authentically. Most overthinking comes from a fear of losing someone, disappointing someone, or being misunderstood by someone. But when your attention is on yourself, these fears loosen their hold. You realize that your worth does not come from someone else's approval. You realize that your identity does not rely on someone else staying in your life. You realize that your value is not determined by someone else's interest or lack of interest. You begin to see yourself not through the eyes of others, but through the clarity of your own self-awareness. And when you see yourself clearly, opinions, moods, or distance of others lose the power to disrupt your inner stability. Returning your attention to yourself also reconnects you with your own desires and direction. When you think too much about someone else, your goals become blurred because part of your mind is always focused on how they fit into your future. You delay your dreams, suppress your instincts, and bend your choices around the imagined presence of someone who may not be meant to shape your path. But when your attention comes back home, you rediscover your purpose. You remember what you want independently of anyone else. You rediscover passions you buried while overanalyzing someone. You find clarity in your ambitions because they are no longer entangled with someone else's unpredictability. This clarity naturally brings peace, because peace comes from alignment. Alignment with your values, your truth, your direction, your inner world. The most profound part of this return is the recognition that your peace is your responsibility, not because others are incapable of contributing to it, but because no one can hold it for you continuously. People change, emotions shift, situations evolve, and relationships transform. But the one constant is you, your thoughts, your awareness, your choices, your inner grounding. When you build your peace around someone else, you make it fragile. When you build it within yourself, you make it unshakable. Your peace grows when your attention is no longer scattered into the unpredictable behavior of others, but rooted firmly in your own presence. It grows when you stop analyzing others and start understanding yourself. It grows when you stop seeking answers in someone else's actions and start listening to the quiet wisdom inside you. It grows when you let go of the need to decipher others and choose instead to rediscover yourself. It grows because peace is not found in the outside world but cultivated in the quiet corners of your own being, where your awareness returns, your energy settles, and your mind remembers its true home within you. Think less about others helps you see your own path clearly, because the more your mind becomes occupied with the thoughts, actions, and opinions of others, the more your inner vision becomes clouded by noise that does not belong to you. Clarity is not something you lose suddenly. It fades slowly each time you shift your focus away from your own journey and towards someone else's behavior or imagined judgments. When your attention is scattered across the uncertainties of other people, your direction becomes blurred. You start doubting your instincts. You hesitate in your decisions. You slow down your progress. You move through life guided not by your own inner compass, but by the emotional reactions triggered by someone else's presence. This is how people lose their path without even realizing it, not by taking the wrong steps, but by thinking too much about people who were never meant to guide them. Every person you think about takes up space in your mind, and that space is limited. When it becomes filled with the thoughts of others, what they think, what they want, how they behave, you leave little room for your own voice. You silence your inner guidance, because your attention is too consumed by external noise. And when that happens, you begin to walk paths that are not yours. You might pursue goals that don't belong to you, because you think they will impress someone. You might hide parts of yourself, because you fear how someone might react. You might sacrifice opportunities, because you imagine someone's disapproval. None of these choices come from your truth. They come from a mind that has been shaped by overthinking people who should not have that much influence over your life. When you think less about others, you free your mind from the unnecessary weight of their imagined expectation. You stop trying to reverse engineer their thoughts or decode their behavior. This releases a tremendous amount of mental energy that was previously trapped in analysis, waiting, doubt, and emotional tension. When that energy returns to you, it naturally redirects toward your own purpose. Suddenly, you have the mental clarity to ask yourself what you actually want, what feels right, what direction your life is pulling you toward. You begin to hear the inner voice that was buried under layers of noise. That voice becomes louder, clearer, more confident, guiding you toward choices that align with your authentic self. The path becomes clearer because you are no longer walking through someone else's shadow. When your thoughts fixate on another person, you inevitably fall into comparison. You begin measuring your life against theirs, your pace, your achievements, your personality, your worth. This comparison weakens your clarity by making your journey feel inadequate or misaligned. But when you think less about them, you stop comparing. You start seeing your life through your own eyes rather than through the distorted lens of envy, insecurity, or admiration. You realize your path is unique, shaped by your experiences, desires, and inner strengths. Your clarity grows because you reconnect with the truth that you are not meant to live anyone else's life, nor are they meant to live yours. Think less about others also reveals how much of your confusion was not confusion at all. It was emotional entanglement disguised as uncertainty. Many people believe they don't know what they want, when in reality, they simply cannot hear themselves because someone else's presence occupies too much space inside them. When you stop thinking about someone, the fog lifts. You realize the answers were always there, but they were blocked by overthinking someone else's opinions or possibilities. When the fog clears, you can see your direction with greater confidence, and decisions that once felt impossible begin to feel natural. Your path becomes clearer because you stop abandoning yourself. Every time you think too much about someone, you leave your own story to stand in the doorway of theirs. You wait for them to act, to respond, to acknowledge you, to validate you, to choose you, to understand you. In doing so, you put your life on hold. You postpone movement. You stop listening to your instincts. You disconnect from your natural rhythm. But when you step back into your own life, when you bring your thoughts and focus home, you begin walking again. You return to your goals, your healing, your growth. You realize your life is too important to pause for someone else's uncertainty or emotional absence. Thinking less about others also reveals your own capabilities. When your attention is fixated on someone, you underestimate yourself because you unconsciously give them power over your emotional state. But the moment you stop thinking about them, you regain your autonomy. You remember your strengths, your dreams, your resilience. You realize you are capable of shaping your life without needing anyone's permission, guidance, or validation. This realization sharpens your clarity because you begin to trust yourself. Again, trust is the foundation of clear direction, and without it, every step feels shaky. But when trust returns, clarity rises with it. The less you think about others, the more you reconnect with your intuition. Intuition is often drowned out by overthinking, especially overthinking people. Intuition whispers, overthinking shouts. Intuition guides, overthinking distracts. Intuition moves you forward, overthinking keeps you stuck in loops. When the noise quiets and the mind becomes still, intuition reawakens. It shows you what to release and what to pursue. It shows you where your energy flows naturally. It shows you which path feels aligned and which one feels forced. This inner guidance cannot be accessed when your mind is occupied by analyzing someone else's behavior. It becomes accessible only when you reclaim your mental space. Thinking less about others also teaches you to prioritize your own emotional landscape. It helps you understand that peace, direction, and clarity are internal states, not external gifts. You begin to see that your mind was never supposed to be a home for the unpredictable behavior of others. It was always meant to be a sanctuary where your own awareness grows. When you stop giving others the power to influence your mental climate, you create the conditions for clarity to rise. You stop reacting to someone else's emotional storms and start cultivating your own calm sky. Your path becomes clearer, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because your attention finally aligns with your purpose. Instead of being scattered in the maze of someone else's intention, you begin to walk with confidence, make choices with intention, and see your future with greater focus. You realize clarity was never missing. It was simply hidden behind the walls built by overthinking people. And when those walls fall, your inner world opens, revealing a direction that was waiting for you all along.